They look at her sitting alone and they whisper like it's a tragedy. They see her walking without a circle and they label her lonely. They see the empty seats around her and think it means she has no value. But what they don't understand is this solitude ain't weakness, it's training. It's where vision sharpens, where strength is forged, where character gets tested in silence. A woman with no friends is not a woman with no power. She's a woman who refuses to settle for counterfeit connections. See, the world worships popularity, but popularity is cheap. It's noisy, it's temporary, it disappears the moment you stop entertaining. But legacy is quiet, legacy is patient, legacy is built in the hours when nobody's watching. And sometimes to build legacy, you gotta walk alone. So I don't pity the woman with no friends. Respect her. Because while you busy searching for company, she's busy searching for alignment. While you chasing approval, she's chasing purpose. While you playing for the crowd, she's building for eternity. A woman with no friends is not invisible, she's unstoppable. When you hear the phrase a woman with no friends, most people think about loneliness first. They think about a life where nobody calls, nobody checks in, nobody to share laughs with, nobody to cry to. That picture in their mind is heavy, almost tragic, like something's missing. But if you really step back and look deeper, what they call isolation can often become independent. What the world might call alone, she might call free. Because when you don't got friends crowding your circle, when you don't got noise in your ear every day, you get a rare gift that most people never learn how to handle: silence. And silence, that quiet space, can either crush you or it can build you. It depends on how you see it. For a woman with no friends, that isolation becomes a mirror. Every moment by herself forces her to see herself with no filters, no distractions, no voices telling her who she is or who she should be. A lot of people don't know themselves because they never had to sit alone long enough to ask those hard questions. They keep people around just to avoid the echo of their own thoughts. But when you got no one else, when the phone don't ring, when your social calendar is empty, you either fall apart or you build yourself into something unshakable. That's where independence is born. Think about it. Most people live their life reacting to what their friends say, reacting to what their crew is doing, reacting to the opinions and expectations around them. But a woman with no friends don't got that kind of noise. She moves off her own rhythm. She don't need approval before she takes a step. She don't need a green light from the group chat before she decides what's right for her. That's independence at its purest form, moving because you choose to, not because somebody else pushed you in that direction. But here's the part that's deeper. Society don't always respect that kind of independence, especially in women. They try to label it as cold, antisocial, bitter. They can't imagine that maybe she just don't need to be surrounded to feel complete. Maybe she understands that having no friends don't mean having no value. It means she values her peace more than she values popularity. And when a woman gets comfortable enough to stand on her own, that's when people start paying attention. Because truth is, most can't handle it. The difference between isolation and independence is mindset. Isolation is when you feel trapped in your solitude, when you're waiting on someone to come fill the space. Independence is when you take that same solitude and turn it into fuel. It's when you say, I got me. I trust me. I believe in me. I move with me. That's not a punishment. That's power. Because once you learn how to survive and thrive without the constant company of others, you stop being afraid of being left out. You stop being afraid of being abandoned. Nobody can use loneliness as a weapon against you if you already turn that loneliness into strength. And it's not just about sitting alone in a room, it's about what you build in that room. A woman with no friends often finds herself pouring energy into her vision, into her craft, into her goals. She got hours of focus that somebody else might waste gossiping or chasing validation. She can take the pain of not having people around and turn it into productivity, into wisdom, into art. That's how legacies are built. Some of the strongest people didn't rise because they had a crew holding them down. They rose because they had nobody and they had to figure it out with nothing but their own drive. When you depend on friends too much, you depend on borrowed energy, and borrowed energy runs out. But when you learn to pull from yourself, when you teach yourself discipline, when you master your own space, that's a battery nobody can drain. That's why what the world sees as isolation can actually be the birth of independence. Because once she learns she don't need a circle to keep her standing, she becomes unstoppable. She can still welcome people, she can still love, she can still connect, but it won't be out of desperation, it'll be out of choice. She chooses who enters her her space, not because she needs them to survive, but because she wants them to be part of what she's already built. The beauty of a woman with no friends is that she redefines what strength looks like. Strength don't always come with a crowd cheering you on. Sometimes strength comes in the silence of your own apartment. The late night talks with yourself, the moments where you break down and then wipe your own tears because there's nobody else around to do it. That independence becomes like armor. Not a cold armor that shuts people out, but sacred armor that keeps her grounded, keeps her whole. So when people say she got no friends, they might think it's an insult, they might think it's a weakness, but if you really look close, that's often the foundation of her independence. She's learning lessons in silence that the loudest, most surrounded people never will. She's not weighed down by the expectations of a circle. She's not distracted by the noise of unnecessary voices. She's free to design her life on her own terms. And that freedom, that independence, is more valuable than any crowd she could ever chase. Strength in solitude is one of those lessons life teaches you when you don't have the comfort of a crowd to lean on. For a woman with no friends, solitude is not just an occasional visitor, it becomes a permanent roommate. And while that might sound heavy to some, it carries a hidden advantage that only a few people in this world ever get to taste. Solitude is where strength is born, because when you're left alone, you find out real quick whether you can carry your own weight or not. You see, the world is noisy, full of distractions, full of opinions, full of people telling you how to move and what to think. But solitude strips all that away. It leaves you with nothing but yourself. And in that silence, you either fold or you grow muscle you didn't even know you had. When a woman spends time in solitude, she starts to hear her own voice clearly. Not the voice her family told her to have, not the voice her friends shaped for her, but her voice. That's powerful because most people live their entire lives with the volume of their own soul turned down low. They keep the TV on, the music loud, the phone buzzing, the conversations constant because they don't want to face themselves. But when solitude is forced on you, you got no choice. You have to sit there and deal with your own reflection, your own mistakes, your own dreams, your own doubts. That's where strength gets built, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners where nobody's watching. Solitude is a gym for the mind and the spirit. Every moment alone is like lifting weights, not on your body, but on your soul. It tests your patience, it tests your discipline, it tests your ability to keep believing when there's nobody clapping for you. Imagine training for a marathon with no crowd on the sidelines, no coach cheering you on, no teammate running next to you, just you in the road. That's what solitude feels like. And if you can run that race, if you can train in silence with no applause, you build a strength that can't be taken from you. Because when the applause finally comes, it won't define you. You'll know you already had it in you before anybody else noticed. For a woman with no friends, solitude also means becoming her own comfort, her own healer, her own motivator. On the nights when the weight feels too heavy, she learns how to soothe herself, how to remind herself of her own worth. That's not weakness, that's resilience. Anybody can feel strong when they have a support system, when they got a group hyping them up. But real strength is when you can look in the mirror with no makeup, no filters, no validation, and still tell yourself, I'm enough, I'm built for this. That kind of self-talk is forged in solitude when nobody else is there to tell you those words. And solitude doesn't just create emotional strength, it creates vision. When you got space and quiet, your mind stretches in ways it can't when you're constantly surrounded. That's why some of the greatest ideas, the most legendary breakthroughs, come from people who knew how to embrace being alone. A woman with no friends can sit with her thoughts long enough to connect dots, to imagine possibilities, to sharpen her goals. While others are out wasting energy trying to fit in, she's building clarity. She's not distracted by drama, by gossip, by the constant pool of social circles. She's in her own lane, and in that lane she starts to see the road more clearly than anyone else. Strength in solitude is also about learning how to move without depending on outside energy. A lot of people are addicted to being surrounded because they don't know how to generate their own fuel. They need someone to inspire them, someone to push them, someone to make them feel valuable. But when a woman learns how to survive in solitude, she becomes her own generator. She don't need borrowed energy. She don't need someone else's push. She builds her own fire, and that fire burns steady because it's rooted in her own soul. That's independence, but it's also strength, because once you know how to stand alone, you become unshakable, even when the world around you collapses. It's not easy though. Solitude can feel like a cage at first. It can feel like punishment. People will even tell her something's wrong, like being alone means being broken. But with time, she starts to see it differently. That cage was actually a classroom. It forced her to learn lessons most people never face. Lessons about patience, about resilience, about knowing your own worth without having to prove it to anyone else. Those lessons are invisible to the outside eye, but they shape her character. And character is what carries you through storms when talent, beauty, or charm fade away. There's also a spiritual side to solitude. When you're alone, you can hear things that you'd miss in the noise. Call it intuition, call it God, call it the universe, whatever name you give it, there's a deeper voice that speaks in silence. A woman with no friends often finds herself in tune with that voice. She starts to trust it, she starts to follow it, and that trust builds strength like nothing else. Because once you believe you're being guided, once you feel that inner connection, you stop chasing outside validation. You know you're exactly where you're meant to be, even if it's just you standing there. That's the gift of solitude. It doesn't just strip you bare, it rebuilds you stronger. It makes you sharp, it makes you resilient, it makes you unbreakable. A woman who's been through solitude and found her strength there is a woman you can't control, you can't manipulate, you can't break, because she already proved to herself that she can carry the weight alone. The power of self-love is one of the most underestimated forces in the world, and for a woman with no friends, it often becomes her only lifeline. When there's nobody around to clap for you, nobody around to gas you up, nobody around to remind you that you're worthy, the only voice you have left is your own. At first, that silence can be brutal because the world conditions people to depend on approval. From childhood, we're trained to measure ourselves by who likes us, who sits with us, who calls us their friend. But when a woman finds herself outside that system, when she doesn't have a circle to validate her, she's forced to discover something deeper. She has to become her own mirror, her own cheerleader, her own safe space. And when she learns that art, she taps into a power that nobody can take away. Self-love in that context isn't about posting cute quotes online or pampering yourself with a spa day. It's about survival. It's about waking up and reminding yourself that you are worthy even if the world acts like you're invisible. It's about talking yourself through the days when rejection feels heavy, when memories of betrayal sit on your chest, when you look around and realize no one's coming to rescue you. Self-love becomes the anchor that holds you steady when everything else is unsteady. It's not glamorous, it's not always pretty, but it's real. For a woman with no friends, self-love teaches her to stop looking for her reflection in other people's eyes, because that's the trap most fall into. They measure their beauty, their intelligence, their value by how other people respond to them. If people laugh at their jokes, they feel funny. If people compliment their outfit, they feel attractive. If people approve their decisions, they feel smart. But when you don't have that constant feedback, you're forced to look within and ask yourself, do I like me? Do I approve of me? Do I believe in me? And once you can answer yes to those questions without needing anybody else's stamp, that's liberation. The power of self-love also shows up in boundaries. A woman who learns to love herself in solitude won't just let anybody walk into her life and mistreat her. When you're desperate for friendship or attention, you'll settle for toxic people, fake support, or shallow connections just to fill the void. But a woman who has mastered self-love already knows she's enough, so she'd rather stand alone than shrink herself for company. That's why self-love is strength. It teaches you to be selective, to protect your space, to honor your peace. She doesn't beg for seats at tables where she's not respected. She builds her own table and sits comfortably by herself if she has to. And it's not easy to get there. It takes breaking cycles of self-doubt. It takes unlearning lies that were planted by family, by society, by old friendships that turn sour. She has to fight her own inner critic, the one that says she's not enough, the one that whispers she must be flawed if she doesn't have friends. Self-love becomes a daily practice of shutting down those voices and choosing new ones, choosing to affirm herself, choosing to treat herself kindly, choosing to forgive herself for mistakes and keep growing. It's not a one-time thing. It's a discipline, a muscle you keep building every day. There's also a creative energy that comes from self-love. When you're not begging people to see you, you start creating for yourself. Maybe you write, maybe you paint, maybe you build a business, maybe you just pour energy into your health or your craft. But whatever it is, you do it from a place of genuine care for yourself, not to impress, not to gain approval. That authenticity shines because it's rooted in love, not in neediness. People start to notice, but by then it doesn't even matter because you already validated yourself long before the world caught up. Self-love is also about resilience. When life knocks you down and there's no friend to lift you up, you have to decide to lift yourself. You have to remind yourself you've been through worse. You have to remind yourself you're still standing. You have to remind yourself that you deserve to get back up and try again. That resilience, born out of loving yourself enough to keep fighting, becomes unbreakable. And once you develop it, you move differently. You don't fear abandonment. You don't beg for acceptance. You don't lose yourself in relationships because you know you'll be okay either way. The world often looks at a woman with no friends and thinks she must be lacking something. But maybe she's not lacking. Maybe she's overflowing with self-respect, self-awareness, and self-love to the point where she won't compromise for company. Maybe she understands that her energy is too valuable to waste on shallow connections. Maybe she'd rather sit in silence with herself than fill her life with noise that doesn't build her. That's the kind of power most people don't even recognize because they've never lived it. The real beauty of self-love is that once a woman learns it, she can give love without losing herself. She can enter friendships, relationships, partnerships from a place of fullness, not emptiness. She doesn't cling, she doesn't beg, she doesn't settle because she already loves herself enough to walk away if it costs her peace. That's when love becomes healthy. That's when connection becomes real because it's not rooted in desperation, it's rooted in choice. So the power of self-love is more than just a feel-good slogan. For a woman with no friends, it's the foundation that keeps her steady. It's the reason she can wake up every day and still stand tall even when the room is empty. It's the reason she can build without applause, dream without validation, and live without fear of abandonment. And that kind of power, once unlocked, makes her unstoppable. Trust and betrayal are some of the deepest lessons a woman with no friends has to carry because most of the time, she'd end up friendless by accident. People don't just wake up and decide they don't need anybody. More often than not, the story behind her solitude is written in chapters of betrayal. Chapters where trust was given freely and then mishandled. Chapters where loyalty wasn't returned. Chapters where she learned the hard way that not every smile is sincere and not every hand extended is meant to hold you up. Sometimes it's meant to pull you down. And once you've been through that enough times, once you've seen the mask slip off people you thought would never hurt you, it becomes easier to choose silence, easier to choose distance, easier to protect your heart by keeping your circle empty. Always, trust is fragile, and when it's broken, it doesn't just disappear, it leaves scars. A woman with no friends often carries those scars in silence. She remembers the conversations she thought were safe but ended up in the mouths of strangers. She remembers the time she leaned on someone and they weren't there. The time she celebrated others only to be forgotten when it was her turn. Each betrayal doesn't just hurt in the moment, it reshapes how she sees people, how she sees herself, how she moves through the world. And after enough letdowns, she starts to realize that maybe having no friends is safer than having the wrong ones. The pain of betrayal runs deep because trust is sacred. To trust someone is to give them access to the most vulnerable parts of you, to open the door to your insecurities, your dreams, your fears, your raw truth. When someone betrays that, they don't just betray your trust, they betray your faith in humanity. It makes you question your judgment, it makes you second guess your instincts, it makes you wonder if you can ever truly know someone. That's why betrayal is one of the hardest things to recover from. It doesn't just break the bond between you and another person, it shakes the foundation you stand on. For a woman with no friends, trust becomes something she guards like treasure. She doesn't hand it out easily. She doesn't get impressed by words. She pays attention to actions. She learns that loyalty isn't what people say when they're smiling in your face. It's what they do when your back is turned. She learns that not everyone who claps is clapping out of love. Sometimes they clap to keep rhythm until they can take your spot. She learns that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Most of the time it comes from the people you let closest to you. And once you understand that, you move differently. You build walls, not out of bitterness, but out of protection. But the thing about betrayal is that it can also be a blessing. It forces clarity. It shows you who's real and who's not. It cuts away the fake so you can see the truth. A woman with no friends may have lost people, but she gained wisdom. She gained the ability to read between the lines, to catch the energy behind the words, to sense when someone's intentions aren't clean. That's a kind of strength that can't be taught in books. It can only be learned through experience, through pain, through the fire of disappointment. And once she's walked through that fire, she doesn't fear it anymore. And trust and betrayal also shape how she trusts herself, because after being betrayed, one of the hardest parts is forgiving yourself for not seeing it sooner. A woman who's been through that has to wrestle with the voice in her head that says she should have known better, but in time, if she does the work, she learns that being betrayed doesn't mean she was weak. It means she was open. It means she had a heart willing to believe in others. That's not weakness, that's humanity. And once she forgives herself, she learns to trust her own instincts again. She learns that her gut was speaking, even if she ignored it back then, and she promises herself she won't ignore it again. That's the rebirth after betrayal. Not just losing faith in others, but regaining faith in yourself. What makes trust so powerful for a woman with no friends is that when she finally chooses to give it again, it means something. If she lets someone into her space, if she shares her heart, if she calls you family, that's not casual, that's sacred. Because you're stepping into a space that was locked for a long time, guarded by pain and lessons. You're receiving a gift that cost her years of healing to be able to give again. And if you betray it, you won't just be another name on her list, you'll be proof of why she chose solitude in the first place. The connection between trust and betrayal explains why she walks with such caution. She's not bitter, she's wise. She's not cold, she's careful. She understands that trust is currency, and she refuses to spend it where it won't multiply. She's not interested in being surrounded by people who drain her. She's not interested in calling everyone her friend. She'd rather stand alone than share her energy with people who don't honor it. That's not loneliness, that's discernment, and that discernment is born from betrayal. So when people see a woman with no friends, they might assume she's antisocial. They might assume she doesn't know how to connect. But the truth is, she probably knows how to connect too deeply, too sincerely, too real for a world that often thrives on shallow ties. She knows the cost of betrayal, and she's not willing to pay it again just to say she's surrounded. She values her peace more than she values appearances. She'd rather have no friends than sit in rooms where loyalty is absent. And that choice, though it might look lonely from the outside, is actually the ultimate act of self-respect. Popularity is a game most people get caught up in, and for a woman with no friends, it's a game she usually steps away from, not because she can't play it, but because she understands how empty it really is. Popularity feeds the ego, legacy feeds the soul. Popularity dies when the crowd changes, legacy lives long after you gone. And once you've seen how quick people can switch on you, how fast their cheers can turn into silence, how fragile approval really is, you stop chasing it. You stop begging for likes, you stop measuring your value by numbers, you stop trying to fit into circles that don't see your vision. You start realizing that every minute you waste trying to be liked is a minute stolen from the work you could be doing to leave something behind. A woman with no friends often feels that difference sharper than most because she's already experienced what it feels like to be excluded, to not be chosen, to not have the crowd on her side. At first, it hurts because we're wired to want belonging, but over time she learns that being overlooked is actually freedom. If nobody's watching, she can build without distraction. If nobody's clapping, she can grind without interruption. If nobody's asking for attention, she can pour that energy into her purpose. That's the trade-off. When you're not tied to popularity, you can focus fully on legacy. Legacy is bigger than the moment. Legacy is not about being known, it's about being remembered. It's not about noise, it's about impact. It's not about who shows up to your party, it's about who benefits from the seeds you planted long after the music stops. And a woman with no friends often understands that on a level most don't, because she's not busy trying to maintain a social calendar. She's busy trying to maintain her vision. She's not distracted by shallow connections. She's dedicated to building something solid, something that speaks when she's not in the room. Popularity is addictive because it feels good in the moment. People praising you, people noticing you, people talking about you, it can give you a high. But the problem with that high is it fades. And when it fades, you're left chasing it again and again. Legacy doesn't fade. Legacy multiplies. Legacy is when the work you did, the character you showed, the energy you carried keeps echoing beyond you. That's why legacy takes patience. It's slow, it's quiet, it's not glamorous while you're building it. You won't always get recognition in the middle of it, but once it's done, it stands, it lasts, it can't be erased. For a woman with no friends, choosing legacy over popularity also means she learns to detach from the need for constant validation. She doesn't care if her moves are celebrated today because she knows her moves are designed for tomorrow. She doesn't get discouraged when people don't notice because she knows the seed is still growing underground before anybody sees it sprout. She doesn't water her dreams with attention, she waters them with discipline. And discipline always pays back more than applause. There's also a kind of courage in rejecting popularity, because popularity usually demands you to fit in, to follow trends, to play along with what everyone else is doing. But legacy demands originality, it demands authenticity, it demands you to be so rooted in your own purpose that you're willing to stand out, even if it means standing alone. That's why a woman with no friends can thrive in legacy building. She's already comfortable outside the crowd. It's like she doesn't need to blend in. She's already learned how to survive without being chosen, so she's not afraid to be different. That difference becomes her strength. It becomes the reason her name carries weight long after popularity forgot her. And when you focus on legacy, your standards change. You stop caring about who knows you and start caring about what you stand for. You stop caring about how many people are around you and start caring about how many lives you touch. You stop chasing quick wins and start building foundations that can't be shaken. That mindset shift is powerful because once you taste the purpose of legacy, the shallow sweetness of popularity doesn't tempt you anymore. You realize it's not about being loud now, it's about being lasting forever. People who chase popularity are often left empty, but people who build legacy are full even when they're alone because they know their solitude isn't wasted, it's invested. Every hour alone with her thoughts, every day grinding without applause, every sacrifice that looks invisible to the outside world is actually